Hello, and welcome back to our 37th episode of our live stream. Normal temp before mummification. Of course, this is an allusion to 37 degrees Celsius, which is normal body temperature, which is the temperature you're supposed to be at when you're alive. Afterwards, you get a little on the cooler side. So most mummies start off at 37 degrees Celsius. So that's our little tribute here to mummification. We've already got a full slate tonight, so we're going to get started here. And the rules are sort of the same as always, which is super chats have priority. And if you're not going to give me a super chat, that's fine. We do take non-super chat questions on this live Q&A, as many as are interesting and reasonable. We ask that you put a Q and a colon in front of your question, so I know that it's being directed to me and not to somebody else on the live stream. We also ask that you only mention the question once. Okay, so that way you can as I sort through it, it doesn't get clogged up with duplicates. So we just ask that you say it once, prefix it with a Q and a colon, and also finally, if it's about something in the language or in the or a reference to the Bible, please include that reference or what you think the word means, so that I have a little bit of context to go from. So with that said, let's get into the questions. Now, the first question was actually something that was posted on my Facebook ad. Now, I don't normally take these, but it wasn't looking like we're getting many non-super chat questions, and I'm kind of glad to see that we're now getting a lot of them. But we're going to take this one anyway. So, which is from Jed Phillips, and he writes, Dr. Falk, I'm not sure if I'll be on the live stream tonight, so I'll post this question here. When Jonah was fleeing the presence of the Lord, was he specifically fleeing from the temple? In chapter 2, he declares that he will set his face back to God's holy temple. Is this an indication of what he was running from in the first place? Thank you. Let me pull up here. Jonah chapter 1. And we got actual biblical text here tonight, so we are slowly learning how to do this stuff. Taking me a long time, but we're getting there. So anyway, I want to thank him for the question. It's a good question. But I do think that the context of Jonah and the reason why he fled is actually in Jonah chapter 1. Now, he's a prophet, Jonah the son of Amittai. And he's actually a prophet mentioned in 2 Kings. So, he's an identified prophet of the era. So, it says in the first two verses, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise and go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Now, he is turning his face from the temple. And we got to remember that, in the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, that there was this idea of localism. The idea that God can be one place at a time. So he is using that sort of metaphor here of turning his face to the temple where the presence of the Lord would have been, to basically say, okay, that's where the Lord is residing. So there is a little bit of that going on here. But the real reason why he's running is because the Lord wants him to go to Nineveh. He doesn't like the Ninevites. They're not a nice people. They're not a nice people, And even the Lord says, their wickedness has come up before me. So I think that's the real reason why he's running, is because he's been asked to go to Tarshish. someplace, or to go to Nineveh where he doesn't want to go. And he's going in the exact opposite direction. Tarshish is, a lot of people have guessed that it's Spain. So, I mean, that's as far in the opposite direction as you can run from Nineveh. So that's what's going on here. Anyway, I want to thank you for the question. It's an interesting question, but that's I think about all that's going on here. So with that, I'm going to see about, let's take a couple more non-super chats before we get into the super chats. It's loading up here. Okay. And lovely. We are going to take Life Avant. How would you explain the use of Satan in Numbers 22:22? It seems like a good verse for expanding a person's understanding, the word's meaning beyond the goatman imagery that pervades the term. Right? Go to Numbers. I'll read it in its context, which includes verse 21. So Balaam arose in the morning and saddled his donkey and went with the leaders of Moab. But God was angry because he was going. And the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as an adversary against him. And he was riding on his donkey, and his 2 servants were with him. Now, Satan here is being translated here as adversary. Okay? So it's basically that there's an opponent here that's being put up against Balaam. So it's more of it's not really a name. It's not a name here. It's more of a job title. He's fulfilling the role of an adversary here, not necessarily fulfilling the, say, a specific name of a specific spiritual entity. So that's what's going on in this text. So, and Satan can be either, adversary, opponent, accuser, or it can be the name of that wicked entity. So I hope that explains the question. Thank you very much for the question. I will take one more non-super chat here before we start. Let's see here. Bing's question. Okay, in Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 35:22, it says that Pharaoh Neko had received word from God when he told Josiah not to fight him. Did he really? If so, should Josiah have consulted the Urim and the Thummim? Okay. Well, let's go to that text. In Chronicles. (35). I'll start at verse 21. But Neko sent messengers to him, saying, What have we to do with each other, O king of Judah? I am not coming against you today, but against the house with which I am at war. And God has ordered me to hurry. Stop for your own sake from interfering with God, who is with me, that he may not destroy you. However, Josiah would not turn away from him, but disguised himself in order to make war with him. Nor did he listen to the words of Neko from the mouth of God, but came to make war on the plain of Megiddo. Okay. The text says God, but this could have been just as easily, a god as well, or the gods could have told him. So, we're getting this from Neko say so, not from, say, the text say so. So we don't know if God himself was involved in this message or not. but it's being told from Neko's perspective. Because one of the things that happens is Neko goes up and he fights, and this is the lead up to the Battle of Carchemish, where Neko is going to the aid of his allies, the Assyrians, to go to war against the Babylonians, the Babylonian and Mede coalition. And Neko ends up losing this battle. I mean, he gets trounced. I mean, he escapes with a good portion of his army, but he loses the battle. So I don't know if it's hard to say here when we aren't really told if God himself actually told him, or if he is relating what he knows, and this is just being translated into Hebrewese to convey the words of Neko himself. Okay? But we have to remember that this is Neko's testimony. This is what Neko is saying. It's not what the text itself is saying. Now, the second one is, should Josiah have consulted the Urim and the Thummim? Yes, absolutely. He should have consulted the Urim and Thummim, because that's what kings were supposed to do. They were supposed to consult the Lord before going to war, and he didn't. So, yeah, absolutely, he should have. Would the result have been any different? Maybe not. Because even if he, what Josiah is doing here is he's playing regional politics. He's doing brinksmanship. He's trying to prevent Neko from reaching the Assyrians, which, the kingdom of Judah was really, really afraid of. Assyria had terrorized the region for centuries. So, Josiah saw this as a way of sticking it to the Assyrians, not realizing that the Babylonians were going to be worse. So, there was he's definitely playing regional politics here. So, would he have even listened to the Urim and Thummim if it had told him no? It's hard to say. But at this point, that's just a speculative question at this point. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Great question. Okay, let's get to the super chats. Now for a moment. Super chats. And our first super chat comes from Avraham Benhaim for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hi, Dr. Falk. I have heard from you and others that European scholarship is moving away from classic documentary hypothesis. Yes, they are. Are they moving further than unified authorship or closer? It's going to really depend. Some European scholars have gone to more of a supplementary hypothesis, which basically states that there was a core Torah document that gets added upon as time goes on. So they do have redaction, but it's a different kind of redaction, and it's a later theory, it proposes a later authorship than, say, the documentary hypothesis. The documentary hypothesis thinks that the original texts were written around 950 BC, whereas the supplementary hypothesis dates it to the 8th century. So it's in some ways it's moving further away. But then again, too, you also have people that are sort of thinking that there might have been a core document that goes way back to the late Bronze Age, and then redaction takes over in that, and that's closer to a unified authorship. So it's really going to depend on which scholar you talk about. I think the one thing about European scholarship right now is that the consensus is more fragmentary than it was, say, than when the document hypothesis really dominated the scene. So it's going to really depend. I think probably at this point the supplementary hypothesis has more traction in Europe, though, than other theories. But in many respects, I think that's a further moving away from unified authorship. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. It's a great question, and Very much appreciate it. Okay, our second super chat also comes from Avraham Ben Hayim for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you so much, Dr. Falk. Your channel has been a blessing. Well, I'm so glad to hear that. The reason why we started these Q&A sessions was to provide a service back to the community. I mean, we were getting overwhelmed on the comment section for questions, and we still do take questions on, say, the comments of our videos. But, you know, we find that my time is, well, we're finite beings. And I don't have enough hours in a day to answer every question. So we started these live streams as a means to try to answer questions, at least in a sort of a concentrated and structured format. It was really to help people, to provide answers to questions, to do our best to be as available to our subscribers as we could be. You know, we do believe that we should be visible, and we do believe that what we do should provide benefit. So anyway, I want to thank you for that super chat, just to support us and to give us encouragement. It does help. We do appreciate all the prayers and encouragement we get from all our subscribers. But thank you very much. Very much appreciate it. Okay, our third super chat comes from Brick Creation for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. People say the Megiddo stables are from a later date and not from Solomon, and I would agree with that. What is the evidence for and against it? Is it possible that the men Solomon hired was good enough to make stables look like a later date? No, that's not quite what's going on here. The problem with the identification of Solomon's stable at Megiddo is that it was basically taking two verses and sort of drawing a conclusion from them. This is one of the things we have to realize about biblical archaeology, is oftentimes it takes our readings and corrects the reading. That's one of the biggest problems we've had with all, is that, you know, we aren't coming to the biblical texts with an empty brain. You know, we're coming to it with presuppositions. And when they did the excavations at Megiddo, they came with a full head. For example, they took two passages that they were very, very familiar with, which was 1 Kings 9:15, which talks about one of the cities that Solomon refurbished was Megiddo. They also took another passage, which 1 Kings 10:26, where it talks about all the horses and stables for them that Solomon had built. And early archaeologists, when they were excavating Megiddo, basically said, "Oh, he's renovating Megiddo. He's got horses and stables, and look, we found a stable at Megiddo. Therefore, it belonged to Solomon. It was Solomon's stables." Well, it doesn't quite work that way. It was reading into the text from one meaning. You know, the kind of the old adage, you know, the old sort of synthesis. Judas hung himself, go forth and do likewise. You know, if you take two unrelated texts and you paste them together, you can get some fabulously wrong results. And that's what happened here, is these are not actually Solomon's stables. And ceramic typology places this during the reign of Jeroboam II. So what's going on at the Megiddo stables is that what we have here is a small set of stables that was basically used for horse breeding. And Jeroboam II was providing horses and chariots for the Assyrians. At that point in time, Jeroboam's kingdom was essentially a satellite nation for the Assyrians. It was a satellite economy. So the northern kingdom of Israel was providing goods and services to the Assyrians. And among those goods and services were trained chariot horses as well as chariots. So what the main problem with identifying this with Solomon really was the ceramic typology. The ceramic typology dates to much, much later than the Solomonic period. So it's going to date into that. I believe it is 8th century BC. Let's see, check here. Right. Let's see. Jeroboam the second dates to. Let's see if I can. Yes, 8th century. So 782 to 753. So there's just the two worlds of ceramic typology are far apart. So it's not that they look like a later date; it's that they are a later date, and it's not the stables that themselves look late; it's the ceramics that are there that look late. So that's what's going on at Megiddo. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the generous super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, our fourth super chat is also from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much. Ezekiel 29 prophesied that the Egyptians would be scattered. Did this happen with the Persians? It would have happened with the Persians. It would have happened with the Assyrians. The prophecy seems to be written during 580 BC. Okay, well, Ezekiel himself is before the Persians. Long before the Persians. So I don't think this is going to be written during that period of time, honestly. I think I believe it's about 3 centuries before this that we find this prophecy being written. But like prophecy, all prophecy, it's meant to be recontextualized with every generation. So were the Egyptians scattered? Yeah, when the Assyrians came through, the Assyrians had a doctrine of deportation. Whenever Assyrians arrive on the scene, one of the things they do to prevent revolts is they deport people, and they move them around. So we see this happening when the Assyrians conquer the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC. They're going to do this when Ashurbanipal and the first and Esarhaddon, conquer Egypt. So they're going to deport people, and move them around, just because this was normal doctrine for the Assyrians, and that's what I think is happening there. So I think the fulfillment of the prophecy is even much earlier than the Persian period. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Great question. Very much appreciated. Okay, and then our fifth super chat, also from Brick Creation for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is your opinion on Maggie Bryson and her thoughts on the Exodus? I've met Maggie. I've met her at an RC conference. I've even had a conversation with her once. I think she's a nice person. I don't think she's very rigorous with her approach to the Bible. I think she's approaching it with very much a Sunday school fundamental, not a fundamentalist. She's an Episcopalian, so she'll never be a fundamentalist. But she is approaching it with a certain preconceived mindset. When I hear her talk about, say, the Exodus, she mentions that we have no evidence of Israelites worshiping Yahweh in Egypt. Well, she's right about that as far as the time period of the Exodus goes, because that's in many ways a really sort of simplistic reading. That's a simplistic reading of the Exodus account, because they're not yet Israelites, and they won't become Israelites until after the Exodus. And as far as the worship of Yahweh goes, that doesn't happen until Moses brings Yahweh back with him from Midian. So in both respects, yeah, she's going to be right here. There's no evidence of the Israelites worshiping Yahweh in Egypt, but the Bible never claims it either. So I think she tends to read the text in a very sloppy way. Now, I don't know much about her otherwise than that. I think I might have heard one of her papers at the RC conference, the American Research Center in Egypt. I think she's a fine Egyptologist. I know she's right now a professor at Johns Hopkins, but I don't think her biblical work is very good at all. But then again, she's also a pure Egyptologist as well, so I can see where she wouldn't necessarily have a large interest in that also. So anyway, that's my opinion of her. I think she's a perfectly nice person, but I also think that her comments on the Exodus are not exactly well informed. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Next one is from the Camelec Bird for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shabbat Shalom, Dr. Falk. Shabbat Shalom. I was wondering, did Moshe go to Sheol? Yes. If so, was his shade brought out during Messiah's transfiguration? Yes. Both. In both cases, the answer to both your questions is yes. Moses did descend to Sheol. Prior to the resurrection, all spirits of all people went to Sheol. Now, we have to understand that Sheol has a good neighborhood and a bad neighborhood. Okay? There's definitely a good and a bad neighborhood. And the text uses the analogy of a river running between them. Okay? Or a gulf. Okay? So you can be on the right side of the river and the wrong side of the river. Or the train tracks, as it were. And the saints in the Lord went to the good side of the river, the good side of the of Sheol, and the wicked, the unbelievers, the idolaters, they went to the bad side. And after the resurrection, the people on the good side of Sheol went to heaven to be with the Lord. Okay, this is why, in the creeds it says that Christ descended into Hades, and that's what's meant here. Is he descends into Hades to proclaim the good news to the saints and to the sinners. Both get to hear this. But those who are righteous in the Lord, they're going to go up to Sheol. But indeed, before the resurrection, Moshe is in Sheol. So also with Elijah as well, but. Well, Elijah isn't, but Elisha is. So Elijah is actually up in heaven because he didn't actually die. That's one of the interesting sort of idiosyncrasies that go on here. Like, two people were never considered to be in Sheol. Enoch and Elijah, because they didn't actually die, so they could actually go directly to heaven. But during the resurrection, everyone in the Lord goes up to heaven. And Sheol is still there for those who are the unrighteous, waiting for that final judgment day. So yes, his shade is brought out for the transfiguration. And we do find another time where a shade is sort of brought out for this, which is Samuel's during the Witch of Endor. So we do know that the spirits of the dead can make appearances, for certain types of events, and that's what's going on here at the trans. So anyway, I want to thank you for that those questions and for that super chat. Very much appreciate it, and it's good to see you here tonight. Okay. RG Strategy for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good to see you here. How many ancient Egyptian kings have been identified from the Bible? Sorry if you've already answered this before. Okay. Well, There was actually, was it Nathan that answers that? Let's see if I can find that in here. There, I see it. All right. He actually has, Nathan Yadon has actually a pretty good list here. Shishak, which is Shishonk the First. Osokon the Fourth, which is called So. Taharka. Neko the Second. Hofre. He misses a few, though. There's actually a few that are actually mentioned in oblique ways. Ramses II is mentioned by toponym. So that is the city of Ramses. So he's mentioned. Merneptah is actually mentioned through two toponyms. The spring of Merneptah is mentioned. There is also another one that Nathan missed, which is Augustus Caesar. He's a pharaoh. He's called Pharaoh in the Egyptian monumental inscriptions. So he's also mentioned. So several pharaohs have actually been identified. So I didn't count that up. I think that's 1, 2, 3, 7. That's pretty good. That's actually pretty good that we've actually been able to figure out at least this many of the kings of Egypt from the Bible. So yeah, it's a really great question, and it's one of those questions that is we wish there were more, but we actually got a pretty good selection. So we do know that there were people in the Bible who actually existed. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Cataphracts 3 for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. What are your favorite bands? Ooh. I have very, very eclectic tastes in music. Very eclectic. I like a lot of Japanese and anime music. I like Bandmate, for example, and the Wakagaki band. I like trance music. I like Tangerine Dream. Big fan of Lacuna Coil. Big fan of Lacuna Coil. Great band. I listen to some Metallica. So I have very, very diverse tastes in music. The Valley of Nausicaa has had. I love soundtracks. The Valley of Nausicaa has just one of the most haunting soundtracks. I like the soundtrack from Vampire Girl Miyu and Blade Runner. So I have a really, really eclectic tastes in music. So my musical tastes are all across the board. So I hope that gives you some idea of my musical tastes. One of the reasons why I was able to develop musical tastes that I did was one of my first jobs coming out of college was working in the music department of a big department store. So there, I actually developed quite the taste for music, because we'd have to open up certain CDs and play them on the speakers while the customers came in. So we try to pick good albums to do this. So not the junky ones. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Really, really appreciate the question. Okay. Christopher Larson for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, I think I see the question below it. So let's get that up. All right. Dr. River Song is a sexy time-traveling, dialogue-killing, sociopathic, TARDIS-piloting archaeologist from the Doctor Who mythos. Have you I think you've been fantasized about being that kind of archaeologist. Uh, mm. Well, you can't be an archaeologist with some fantasizing involved. You always fantasizing about the big dig or the big find or something you would love to find someday. So absolutely, there is a little bit of fantasizing involved. Um, Most of us don't want to encounter a scorpion or a cobra, let alone a Dalek. So we tend to be a little more pacifistic than that. Um, but I will say too, though, that I became inspired to become an archaeologist by Doctor Who. Particularly the Pyramids of Mars, the classic Doctor Who episode, where the Doctor has to fight the Egyptian god Sutek. So that whole sort of that episode was my favorite growing up, and it really inspired me to become an Egyptologist. So absolutely, science fiction does impact you know your life choices, and I'm an example of a person whose education was in many ways guided you know or inspired by these works of science fiction. So absolutely. I didn't think River Song, though. That was not an inspiration for me. But Doctor Who was. The Tom Baker Doctor Who. So, anyway, thank you very much for that super great super chat. Very generous of you and very much appreciate. I love these questions, too. Okay. And I see you've contributed there as so. I answered that question, hopefully. And again, thank you very much for the super chats. Wonderful. It really helps this channel out. It helps support us and keep things going. So very much appreciate all the super chats. Very much appreciate your support of our channel. We can't do it without you, and we really appreciate it. Okay. Got a $5 super chat here from Cambrit. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is it true that there are extra biblical sources for King Og, and how big does the Bible imply he was? Okay, I am not sure that there are extra biblical sources for King Og. I'd have to look that up further. I'm not aware of any on the top of my head, but that might just not be that I just don't know what they are. So, unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to claim ignorance right here on now. But I'll look into it. I'll look into this, and I'll see if I can find any extra biblical sources for Og. As I say, I'm not aware of any, but that just might mean I'm just not aware of the inscriptions, whatever they were. So that's about all I can say right now on this. But I do want to thank you for the super chat, and very much appreciate it. All right, Charles for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. I've heard you say that we'd find evidence of Joseph by his Egyptian name. Yeah, Zephaniah Panok. It's an Egyptian name. It comes from Jed and Paonk, the one who is given as the living one. So there is an Egyptian etymology to that name. So there's it's definitely an Egyptian name. And then you ask the question: are there any current archaeological sites that you think will find his name? No. I think there's archaeological sites that are being worked on where it's possible that his name could come up or could be found. Do I think we will find his name? No, I don't. And the reason is because he was situated at the city of Avaris. Now, there is an active archaeological excavation going on at Avaris, and it's being right now done by the the Austrian concession that's run by Manfred Beetalk. Now, the problem with Avaris is the preservation of text is horrible there. We don't find any text at Avaris. We have found some scarabs. We have found some Semitic graves, Semitic houses, Semitic tombs, Semitic pottery. We do find lots of stuff at Avaris. The problem is we haven't found any text there. And it isn't that there wasn't text there. It's that the excavation is well below the water line. And that just destroys everything. You know, water is the big enemy of archaeology. And especially water like we find there, which is so heavily laden in salt. That just destroys papyrus and stone alike. It's terrible for preservation. So I highly doubt we'll find his name. It's possible. It could happen at some point where another part of Avaris is excavated and we find his name. But if we do find his name, it's going to be there. That's where we're going to find it, at Avaris. But I also don't think that the chances are very good, because the chances of finding all text has been so. Interestingly enough, in the Hyksos city, palace, in the Hyksos palace at Avaris, they did uncover the scriptorium there. Now, the scriptorium is a place where you keep all the documents. We find some boule there, which is a clay seals, and there's two fragments of Akkadian tablets there. And they're fragments, and they date roughly to the first dynasty of Babylon. But even though that there's the they estimate that there was something like 300 documents there. Out of those, only 2 clay tablets survive. All of the rest of it has been destroyed. So, you know, it's not very good. And even the clay tablets we have are exceptionally fragmentary. I mean, we just have of one of the clay tablets. There's just sort of a little tiny piece of a tablet, just enough to know that there was an Akkadian word on it, but the cuneiform word. But that's all we have. The other one is more. We have more to it, but it doesn't tell us much. So, unfortunately, we don't have a lot to go on here. We had more. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Next super chat is from Frog Paste for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I know this may be a bit out of your wheelhouse. Are you aware of any extra biblical evidence that describes Nebuchadnezzar going mad as described in Daniel 4:33? Thanks. No, I am actually not aware of any extra biblical evidence that would have described Nebuchadnezzar going mad. As such, we just aren't sure here of what Nebuchadnezzar's mental health was. We do know that after Nebuchadnezzar's reign, that there was a quick turnover of kings. Looks like there were 4 a succession of 4 kings, short-lived kings that reigned after Nebuchadnezzar. And Belshazzar is the last of those. And before the Persians finally. Now, we do have corroborating evidence of Belshazzar. You know, he does show up in one of the cuneiform tablets that's currently in the British Museum. So we do have some evidence here for him. But as far as Nebuchadnezzar's madness, no, we don't have any extra biblical evidence for that, unfortunately. And I doubt we would even find extra biblical evidence just because it wouldn't be something you would find people write about. So, you know, there's going to be, you know, issues about, you know, how we find this stuff. Because, you know, we only find stuff that people actually record. If you talk about the madness of a king, you know, that's almost tantamount to treason. So, you know, you're you're just not gonna just not gonna find that written. So I doubt we'll find anything here again, but you never know. Sometimes you get surprises too. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Catafact 3 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Mr. Conjecture time. Oh, that guy's on vacation again. Mr. Empty Conjecture just... He's on that world tour. He's just going out on that world tour. Starting with completely to his head. And, I've created a monster. Created a monster. Okay. Was Seti's the first pal Mehi Moses? No. Was erased in records by Ramses II? Could be. No, I don't think Mehi is Moses, honestly. Because I think Moses had fled long before then. From what I can best gather, Moses left Egypt sometime during the reign of Horemheb. Now, you kind of have to understand that Horemheb was kind of very much a law and order kind of pharaoh. He really was. So, and frankly, Horemheb didn't put up with junk, garbage from even the aristocracy. No, he's one of the few pharaohs that really was, laid the law hard down on everyone. And we have to understand, Horemheb was a general, and he was a general that lived through the Amarna period, and he saw the corruption of the nobility and the administrative classes, during the time of King Akhenaten, Amarna period. So Horemheb, it really rubbed Horemheb the wrong way. Any corruption, any lawlessness by the aristocracy. So, he had a really, really strict law and order regime. In fact, the first laws that we find from Egypt actually originate with Horemheb. So I think it is more likely that when Moses killed the taskmaster, that it would have been under Horemheb's reign, where those abuses couldn't be tolerated and weren't tolerated. So I think it was at that point where we find Moses sort of hightailing it out of town at that point. So that's what I think was going on. And I think when we look at, say, the life of Moses too, as being the son of a daughter of a king, it's sort of a retrojective thing. Where, after the death of Horemheb, Ramses I comes to the throne, and Moses' mother is then declared a daughter of a king. She being Seti's daughter or Ramses I's daughter. So I think that's the timeline here, and I think that's what's going on here. But I don't think Seti the first pal was Mehi was Moses. So, and it isn't even a good etymological fit. So I mean, it's not even a good etymology. So that's where I think the conjecture now bleeds into that Mr. Empty Conjecture. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. It is interesting to discuss conjectures, though. So, even though I don't personally like to conjecture very much. So, thank you very much. Good to see you here again. Okay. Brian Naylor for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Okay. Should a student presently taking German 3 wait until college to pick up Hebrew and focus on one language, or start it now? Okay. If you've already got the basics of one language under your belt, there you can actually start taking a second language at the same time. So you can actually start it. And he continues. He has strong plans to study the ancient Near East and associated topics, and I teach him. Okay. If you're competent in Hebrew, yeah, sure, you can teach him. If he's at that point where he's already got a good grasp of German already, and he's more or less doing the fine bits at the end, yeah, absolutely, There's no problem taking a second language. In fact, this often happens in, say, graduate school situations where you end up taking multiple languages at the same time. But you usually don't take 2 first-year languages at the same time. So that's sort of the trick here. If you're taking, say, third-year language, yeah, absolutely, you could. It's very doable to pick up a first year of a second language as well. So that's very, very doable. It also is going to depend on how heavy the language is. Hebrew's not an exceptionally heavy language to learn, so thus a lot of people will pick it up. So yeah, that's an appropriate candidate for a second academic language for somebody who's already well advanced in it. So yeah, I think it's doable. If he's going to go on to study the ancient Near East, yeah, absolutely, he's going to need to know both of those languages. He's going to need to know German. He's going to need to know French. He's going to need to know Hebrew, and whatever ancient Near Eastern languages he's study. There's many languages that are from the ancient Near East, but Hebrew is definitely a good foundational language for studying. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. It's a good question, and we are planning on doing a small series on Bible college in the near future. So it might even come out. The first episode might even come out Monday. We'll see. But we are focusing. We've had a lot of requests from high school students that are looking to go to college to do Bible college. So these questions do come up perennially. So we are going to be doing this, and one thing we have discovered though is we can't just do it in one video. There's just too much sort of detail here that's involved. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and look forward to this upcoming series that we're going to be doing. All right. And Camel Leopard again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. When did the name of Yahweh become too holy to pronounce in Judaism? Would prophets like Yeshua, Isaiah, or Jonah have referred to him as Yahweh? Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't seem to have happened. When we started looking at these things, we start seeing the transition of, say, substituting Yahweh with other names. We start seeing this happen around the 2nd century BC. That's when we start seeing that. Until then, the Israelites did pronounce the name as Yahweh. Now, in, say, the 2nd century, they started to replace it with Adonai. Lord Adon. And this sort of placeholder sort of became they didn't do it initially in the text, although we do see this happen in certain texts where the name, the tetragrammaton, which is what we call the Yahweh, is substituted with Adonai in some, say, like scroll text. See this, or we see it substitute with Kyrios, which is Greek for Lord. So, and we do see this transition start happening in the 2nd century BC. Now, later on in, say, medieval Judaism, even Adonai becomes too sacred. That's one of the problems with these placeholders is they sort of keep leveling up the sacredness, and this is why then they now use Hashem, the name, instead of even Adonai. And we do find in, say, the Masoretic texts that date to, say, the 10th century AD, where the vowel pointings of the Tetragrammaton have been replaced with the vowel pointings, or at least suggest that the vowel pointings were taken from Adonai and put into the Tetragrammaton. so that those vowel pointings are a reminder for people to say Adonai instead of Yahweh. But back in the days of the prophets, they would have called it. They would have pronounced it as Yahweh, and that seems to be the proper vowel pointing of the Tetragrammaton, based upon similarities we have in Akkadian to vowel pointing. So that's the best we can figure out here. But it does seem to be something that happens in the Second Temple period, around the 2nd century. So anyway, thank you very much for that great question. And thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Mystery flavor for $20. Well, that's quite a name. There is a stream of thought that seems popular online that all Semitic religion is just a form of worship of astrological Saturn. Do you know where this idea comes from, and how would you respond to it? Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you for the question. Oh boy. Where's Mr. Empty Conjecture when you need him? I mean, that's really what this is. Just empty conjecture. There's no actual evidence for this. Oh, Mr. Empty Conjecture's on tour. He'll make a comeback. Definitely he's going to be making a comeback. No, you get all these strange conjectures of that that the worship of Semitic religion gets its ideas from astrology, and the fine bit of truth here is, like, for example, like Ishtar is the star, or the planet Venus. So you do find that there is a correlation in some early Semitic religions to astrological signs and appearances. Okay, so there is something to do that, but to say that's all it is, it's just a form of worshiping the stars. No, it's much more complicated than that, because we do find in Semitic religion, other anthropomorphizing of the forces of nature, like Yom, the sea, Mot, death, Baal, Lord, there's Shalem, peace, so there are many contributing factors to Semitic religion. So to say it just comes from the worship of astrological events, stars in the sky or constellations, is just really sort of giving short shrift to the complexity of religion in general. And one of the things we're learning as we study more and more, not just ancient religions, but modern religions too, which are formed by similar forces as the ancient religion, is how complex the development of religion really is. It's really, really complicated. So, yeah, this is just it's kind of ridiculous, because it just isn't. But then again, ridiculousness is something we find on popular online theories too. So, it's a good question. The question has merit. The theories don't. Okay? So, anyway, I hope that does answer your question. Thank you very much for the generous super chat. I really appreciate it. Okay. RG Strategy for $2. Thank you very much. You ready for IP's Exodus redo, Dr. Falk? Well, I should be. I helped him do the script. So far, I've done the editing for his. He's doing it in 3 parts. He's and one of the things that I think is really, really great about IP's redo here, I think this is excellent. I think this was a really good idea, is he's broken it up into 3 pieces. And I think that was a really, really smart move on his. He's learned now what he doesn't know, and that's really helpful. I think what he's done here is going to be really fantastic, and you know, IP's video editing skills are just off the charts. I mean, I kind of wish I could edit video like he does. I mean, it's just amazing what he's able to do with video. As I say, I really wish I was able to do video like he does. So, yeah, I'm actually looking forward to it. I'm actually really looking forward to see where he takes this as far as the graphics go. I mean, I know it's on the scripts because I've read them and I've edited them and provide suggestions. So I think this is going to be very, very interesting, and I think this is going to be an excellent redo to do. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Super chat for $5 super chat from Linguist Amo. Thank you very much. Good to see you here tonight, friend. Really don't have a question, but just wanted to support what you do. Love it and enjoy it. Still chuckle at the mana machine, by the way. Oh, my Blender skills have come in handy at times. When we did the redo after we got copyright blocked twice by YouTube, was, you know, okay, we can't have any other content in there. We had to just cut it all out. And we didn't even, I mean, they were really scrutinizing us after that. I mean, not only did they scrutinize that, they went back into our channel and started flagging some videos that they had priorly approved. You know, 2 videos that had all original content got flagged. So, you know, they put us under a microscope after that. So, you know, they were not nice to us. I requested manual review on the other 2 videos they flagged, and then they green lighted it. But dang, you know, they've been having us under a microscope ever since then. So, you know, we had to be very, very careful about what content we do, and we're gonna have to be very careful about what content we do on because of the scrutiny they're giving us now. But I do very, very much love doing the mana machine. I did model it in Blender and did animate it. So we did that. That was fun. And the explosion at the end was also rendered in Blender. So my art skills, my mad art skills came in very, very handy. Not to mention the stick figures. I mean, the stick figures and Mr. Empty Conjecture. My arts and crafts skills came to their most promising points. Now, I have to admit it wasn't that hard for me to do either, though, because frankly, I grew up in a family of artists. You know, I'm like a 4th generation artist. So, and I actually worked as an art jeweler. I had my own casting shop and did my own jewelry for a couple of years. So, you know, these art skills do, I mean, they come in handy, really, really handy. You know, I'm very, very good at Photoshop. So, you know, these things are just, you know, these skills helped. So, you know, people ask me sometimes, you know, what other skills should you know, archaeologists have? Well, you know, get yourself some good art skills. You know, take a drawing class, take an art class. Because you may be asked to sketch an ostraga or a stone tool, you know, and, you know, there's a good set of art skills can be really, really handy. You know, get yourself some computer skills. You know, I mean, I don't know a single archaeological site today that doesn't require somebody who can run a database. Get yourself some IT skills. Get yourself some art skills. You know, frankly, I've developed some really nifty techniques for being able to read hard to read documents just because I knew Photoshop inside and out so well. But these are things that your typical archaeologist can't do. So it's been very, very helpful for on the job. So yes, and it did provide some just great looks too for the Mana Machine. So anyway, I want to thank you for the super chat. It does really support this channel when people give us out of their their generosity. They help us, and this helps us to continue to bring the work to you. So I want to thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And another super chat from the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. How old do you think Moshe was during the Exodus? I've seen calculations ranging from late 30s to early 50s to, and of course, 80. Okay, I don't think he was 80. I don't think he was 80. Maybe he was in his 40s or 50s. The problem, of course, is when they sort of collect his age together, they're taking those three indeterminate years of 40 to get 120. And the problem is, of course, we get the issue with the 340s that the 40 is a euphemism. It's an idiom. It's an idiom for an indeterminate long period of time. So I'm thinking okay, based upon when the murder of the innocents happens, which is usually you can peg that to around the reigns of King I or Horemheb, then followed by Moshe's flight. I'm thinking he's probably in his 20s. He's probably in his really early 20s when he leaves Egypt, and then he comes back about 30 years later. So that's going to put him in his 40s or 50s. So that's what I think is going on as far as his age. I think he's in between 40 and 50. That's my estimation. So I don't think he's 80 at the time. And part of the reason I don't think he's 82 is because when he goes and he sojourns in Midian, he's lifting. He placed his wife and 2 children on a donkey. Okay. If he's 80, is he really lifting up his wife onto a donkey? And his 2 grown sons. Poor donkey. So I don't think he's 80 at the time. So I think we do have to take that idiom as an idiom, honestly. So I would again 40 to 50 I think is a reasonable age for most. And I haven't actually worked out the years exactly, but that does seem to work with what we know about the particular reigns. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. And then we have a super chat from John Fabeck for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Is there a Mesopotamian king or dynasty that would match with the accomplishments in Nimrod in Genesis 10 to 12? Okay. I was just going to read that. Just because it's good always to read. Up. And I have a new toy. I can Bible screen. This is lovely. Genesis. And back a little bit here. Verse 8. Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh in the land of Shinar. And from the land he went forth into Assyria to build Nineveh, area both Ir, Calah, and Resen between Nineveh and Calah, that is the great city. Now, one of the problems here is we don't actually have a good candidate for Nimrod yet, but I haven't looked into this either. I know, I keep promising that I'm going to look into this issue because I get asked this one frequently. We do have several dynasties in Nineveh at the time. Some are more complete than others. So it is, there is going to be some issue here with trying to figure out which king could be a good fit. I mean, I've heard it said that possibly Naram Sin could be it, or Sargon of Akkad. So there's actually several possible candidates here, like Sais thought that Nimrod was Sargon of Akkad. I'm not sure. I haven't, as I say, I haven't done the study on this. I have to still look into this, and I have some more work before I come down on an opinion on this. But I know that was Sace's conclusion that it was Sargon of Akkad. So, but I don't have a opinion here yet. But anyway, that's probably as best as I can sort of discuss this until I actually do the study on this. So. And I know, I keep saying I'm going to do this in my copious free time. Ooh, which has been rather scarce of late. So anyway, I want to thank you for that super chat, and thank you for the question. It is a good question. It is a question that deserves an answer. I just haven't got there yet. So I very much appreciate the super chat, and I want to thank you for the question. Okay, that looks like that's all the super chats we have. Let's go back to regular questions. There's a question there. Where is it? Oh, is it the memorization question? Yes. Okay. We've got a question here from Warrior of the Most High. How should I memorize a question, and how should I focus on my studies? I'm having trouble doing it, and exams are only a few months away. Please help. Okay. I'm going to give you some advice that nobody ever follows. Nobody ever follows this advice. Get some sleep. I'm serious. And this is a do as I say, not do as I do. Okay? This is probably the most hypocritical thing I will ever say on this channel. Okay? It's absolutely hypocritical of me to say get some sleep. Because I am the king of the all-nighters. So, but sleep does help memorization probably more than anything else. You know, make sure you get enough sleep. That's probably the one thing you can do that's not study related that will actually help you memorize things. Now, you're also talking to somebody here who has a very poor memory. Yeah, here I am answering questions live, and I have a ridiculously poor memory. Okay. Some of the thing with memorization is just familiarity. Reading stuff enough, reading your notes often enough, that it becomes so familiar. And educational experts say it takes 7 or 8 kicks of the can. You know, reviewing the material 7, 8 times to actually memorize it enough to bring it back up. So, and some studies suggest that it's even higher than that. So that's not to discourage you, but that's sort of to give you the idea that you have to review it often. The other way to prepare for your studies is to not wait till the last moment. Never wait till the last moment. If you wait till the night before, you're not in a good place. You're really not in a good place to focus on your exam. I would say basically day one, start reviewing. The earliest you can review is when you should start reviewing. And this is one of those things that again, people don't. It's a piece of advice that people don't follow, but they should. So start reviewing early. So start reading your notes early on in the semester. It'll help you foundationally. And if you start reviewing your notes like from the very first class, one of the things you'll find is that it provides a mental structure in your brain that makes the later lessons easier to graft on. So those are two pieces of advice I can give you right off the top. Review early and often. Earlier the better. More often the better. Get sleep. Because sleep will cause your memory to crystallize. This is sort of the difference between short-term and long-term memory. You do want as much stuff in long-term memory as you can get if you're going to study. Yes, we all depend on short-term memory when it comes to the actual final crunch of the exam. Everyone does this. So sometimes things just don't stick the way they should. But if you start early, get lots of sleep, you'll be well prepared. You'll be well prepared for it. So start now. If you haven't, start now. Okay? Start now. Review as much as you can. And do it often. It's more important that you start early and do it often than cram at the end. They found that cramming is not all that helpful. And it's unnecessary if you've done the review prior. Now, there's going to probably come a time in your life when you'll have to cram. Just because the load is so overwhelming. But try to minimize it. Try to minimize cramming. Because it can't even be counterproductive. Like, for example, when I was a college student, and I did my my first 2 years in graduate, I was actually doing a biochemistry major. I was at the University of British Columbia, and there was some guy that tried to cram and do all-nighters prior to the final exams. And he was hyped up on caffeine pills and eating caffeine right out of the bag without even bothering to coffee right out of the bag without even bothering to brew it. So he was not in a good state. Well, he gets into the exam, which is in one of these big halls with just desks, a big airplane hangar. That's where we had our final exams. And the guy gets into the exam. He starts scribbling on, and he does a face plant. He collapses. Face plants right on his desk. And they have to haul him out in an ambulance. Well, they looked at his paper afterwards, and it was just a scribble. No one could read it. So cramming can be really, really counterproductive. You don't want to be there. So, don't try to kill yourself at the beginning. Just review. If you've got a few months away, you got lots of time. Time is on your side right now, but use the time wisely. Be fine. And, in the end, as long as you've used your time wisely, and you do your best, that's all that God expects. Do your best. That's what God expects, is to give him glory through your work. And let the grades settle themselves out. Honestly, the grades will sort themselves out. But put in the work. Put in the work and don't worry about the grades. It will, because if you worry about the grades, you could get into this sort of spinning, and you don't want to do that either. So just let the grades support it, do itself, learn the material. But start early. Start and study often. That's the best advice I can give you. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. I hope it works out for you, and God bless your efforts. Okay. Some other super chats here. One from 501 Mobius. $10. Thank you very much. Good to see you here tonight, friend. The discovery of a scarab from the time of Ramses II at the altar of Mount Ebal could argue that it puts paid to the early date and the documentary hypothesis. Yes, you could argue that. It's not a good look for either one. Now, what's so interesting about the finds at Ebal was the sorting project that happened there. When Zertel did his dig there, he actually had the help of Associates for Biblical Research. They did the sifting project. They didn't have enough people to help out. So, and frankly, these digs, a lot of these digs use the help as a fundraiser too. So digging in Israel is something you have to pay a lot of money for. You pay like $4,000 for the privilege of working at these archaeological sites. So they needed extra hands. They needed extra money. I mean, what archaeological dig doesn't need extra money? So Associates for Biblical Research volunteered to do the to pay out the cash and to do the sorting project for them. And sort of they're the ones that found the amulet and that found the scarabs. So this put, say, Associates for Biblical Research, which are essentially a group dedicated to the early date of the Exodus. Now they're in this difficult bind. They found the evidence that shows that the altar at Mount Ebal is of the late date, which is that 12th or 13th century, late 13th century BC date. So this is a very, very problematic thing for them. And I've heard Bryant Wood basically try to walk this one back. You know, where he says, well, you know, there was an altar there already dating to Ramses II, but the one that the Israelites built, well, they had to come back later, or they had to come back later on. So the early altar there was the Israelite, and we don't have a date for that. We don't have any evidence for that date, which is just an early altar. They came back later on to relearn Israelite religion during the time of Ramses II. And it does smack of ad hoc reasoning. It's terrible reasoning. Terrible reasoning. But they do have to walk that back now. I did try to get a hold of the excavators, by the way, at going back to one of the previous super chats where I talked about the art skills and the methods I have for text, and I've actually contacted the excavators of Mount Ebal, the current ones, and asked them if they would be willing to send me photographs of some of the plasters that they've recovered, to see if I can recover some text off of them. Because one of the things that my my technique does is it takes texts that are virtually impossible to read and makes them readable. So again, I'd love to get a few samples of hard to read, impossible to read text and apply this method. If I ever do this, if I ever can get a excavator like this to agree to send me some of these high resolution color pictures, apply this technique, this may become one of my next academic papers. So as far as the documentary hypothesis, they hate this too. They hate the whole early dating of the site. Early date as in before when they think the Torah was written. Because one of the things is that documentary hypothesis wants to put this the Torah at very, very earliest to the ninth mid 10th century BC, which is and this sort of connecting the early site of Mount Ebal to the time of Ramses II just does a number on that theory too. So this is one of those times. This is one of those times when both the early daters and the critical scholars are unhappy. Both are unhappy. And that does happen. That does happen where you get archaeological finds that causes division. Where the fundamentalist Christians are unhappy, and say the fundamentalist secular atheists are unhappy. They're both unhappy. So, see another comment here by 501. Yeah, Stripling didn't mention the scarabs in his post. I imagine not. But that's also very, very typical of ABR's approach, is you don't talk about the data that contradicts your hypothesis. You change the data. You change the interpretation to fit your view. And this is what I think is sort of the separation between, say, people with a confession of faith that will, double down on that interpretation, versus, say, somebody who, of my perspective, where I'm going to go, well, maybe I'm not interpreting it right. We saw this earlier in this live Q&A when we talked about Solomon's stables. That was an interpretation of 1 Kings 9:15 and 1 Kings 10:6. There's a perfect example where the excavators' original interpretation was wrong, and was proven wrong by the ceramic typology. It's at that point you kind of have to say, well, maybe the Bible's wrong, but maybe it's my interpretation that's wrong. And I think more often than not, it's the interpretation that's wrong. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. It's a really interesting. A whole Mount Ebal thing is exceedingly interesting. And I do hope someday we do find some text, and I hope my message gets through the excavators, and that they would be willing to give me some photographs that I can actually do some work with. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and it was good to see you tonight, friend. Okay, another super chat here from John Fabeck for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is there a cultural reason why the pharaohs of Egypt were unnamed in Genesis, Exodus, while the kings of Mesopotamia and Canaan were named? Yes, there is actually a cultural reason. And the cultural reason is because the kings of Dynasty 18 and 18 and 19 were often just called Pharaoh. We find this in Egyptian texts of the 18th and 19th dynasty. Now, the term Pharaoh starts to be used during the reign of Thutmose III. So you're already in the early part of Dynasty 18. But it's at that point where the king can be called Pharaoh. And we see this later on, like even into Dynasty 19 and even into Dynasty 20, where the king may be called, say, Pharaoh LPH, Anku Senebu Genebu, given life, health, and dominion. So that was a phrase that was often put after the name of the king, and we do have texts, a fair number of them, where we'll talk about Terah, Anku Senebu Weju or Edu. So, we do see this in the texts, where in Egyptian texts, the king is just called Pharaoh. Now, they'll often call him by his regular name too, like his praenomen and his nomen, but he is often just called that. Now, later on in Egyptian texts, we do see that cultural change too, where it'll talk about the Pharaoh and then give his full name. So this is something that we see in the Egyptian context itself, where he's just called Pharaoh. Inconvenient? Yeah. But it is also pretty good time marker as well. It also gives us a little bit of chronological information that when the Israelites are coming out of Egypt, and they're viewing Pharaoh as being this sort of monolithic institution not just the person himself. So it is something that's particular to that time. That time from, say, the 15th century BC all the way to, say, the 11th century. It's something that is particular to that period of time. So anyway, that's the cultural reason. It's because the Egyptians did it. Coming out of Egypt, the Israelites did it also. They had, because they had that shared culture. So that's the reason. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. It's an interesting question, and it's actually a very telling question too. So let's see here. The Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Last question from me tonight. Maybe. Could be. But does Terah being from Urkesh invalidate the use of Kashdim in the Hebrew of Genesis? No, it doesn't. Part of the reason is because of the Chaldeans were actually in northern Mesopotamia at the time. So there does seem to be a differentiation between of the Chaldeans versus the Great south. And that was more often known as of Sumer. Okay. Now, one of the funniest things about this is we're told that in the text that of the Chaldees is in Mesopotamia. Now, strictly speaking, Mesopotamia is the land between the two rivers, Tigris and the Euphrates. So that's Mesopotamia, is the stretch of land between those. Basically, the Meso between Potamia rivers. So that's Mesopotamia proper. But of Sumer is not in Mesopotamia. It's outside. It's west of the westmost river. So, it's completely outside of that, and there's no river crossing there. You don't have to ever cross the river to get there. So there's a geographic problem here. So I think the use of the Kashdim is to try to differentiate it from the other major So I don't think this is. I think this is a call it now, a gloss, and I don't think this is a later gloss. I don't think this is a later gloss, but it is an explanation. Is an explanation of which is being referred to, as opposed to just saying that that it's outside that. Now, there's another explanation for Kashdim too, which I think has a little weight, which is actually that it is a kind of a mimation of Urkesh. Now, if you look at Kashdim, you have the Kof, you have the Sheen, you have the Dalet and the Mem. Whereas Urkesh, you've got the last two letters, the K and the Sheen. So there is some possibility that this should be read as Urkesh in the original text, and there was a additional letters that were added to the toponym. So that is very much, I think, an issue here as well. Is that it could be it's possible that we have some additional letters being added to the text to make it make sense to a more continuous. So I think there's some problems with the of Sumer. Both in its location, both in the fact that why would you go all the way up to Haran? And if you were headed to Canaan, why would you it just doesn't make a lot of sense geographically either, where you'd have to kind of go up south, you hang out in Haran, and then you come back down. Well, it's possible, but then you're not traveling through Mesopotamia at that point. You're now traveling outside of Mesopotamia. And I think the etymology of Ur-Kasdim is consistent too with Urkesh as well. So anyway, that's where I stand on the issue. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Okay, and that's the last of the super chat. So let's find some. Okay, I'm going to take this other supplement by 5-1 Mobius. Could the rivers have changed course? Yes, they could have, but they would have wiped out the site. That's the problem. Is if Ur of Sumer had been on the eastern half of the river, and if the river had changed over that, erosion by the river would have wiped out the site. So that's a big deal. Okay, so if the river did move over, it would totally have obliterated the site. So I don't think that it would have. You could have. I don't think you can reasonably posit a change of river here. So so that's kind of where I stand on that again. So Terah made a big deal for traveling about 25 miles. Well, he wasn't just a traveler. I mean, he was a sojourner. And I think that's the issue here is that Terah was sojourning. Now, frankly, Terah of Urkesh also makes a big deal of essentially moving about 25 miles. He was sort of the potentate of Urkesh. He's making a big deal. He's making a squawk to the king of Mari. Basically, he calls himself an Apiru at that point. He abandons Urkesh. Terah of Urkesh abandons his his rulership of Urkesh. He moves to North Syria, and he sends letters to the king of Mari, basically saying that, oh, I'm now an Apiru. I'm now a bum. I'm now a bum. And he's sending letters to the king of Mari, essentially saying it's a big deal that I've given up my control over the city, and I've become a bum. So absolutely, if you moving, it's more. This is more than a geographical move. This is a life circumstance move. So it's absolutely a big deal, because the big move isn't the geography. It's the life circumstance. Going from top of the basically you're king of your town. Now you're a no good nothing bum. So that's the big move, and that's the big deal. So when Terah is moving from some Ur of the Chaldees to Haran, it changes their life circumstance. That's why it's a big deal. So anyway, I hope that sort of explains it. Okay. I'm going to take a few more non-super chats because we don't have any more super chats. So do you ever get to the Cloud District often? Oh, oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't. No, it's a quote from Skyrim. Quote from Skyrim. Okay. Yes, I recognize this. No, I never go to the Cloud District. When I play Skyrim, I'm always in the wilderness. It doesn't help that my game keeps crashing too every time I end up in Whiterun. So I don't tend to go there that often. Okay. Let's see, what else here? Let's see. More questions, more questions. I'm going to take another one here from Deanne Seltzar. Abraham as royalty? Wow. Well, that's the $1,000,000 question. It seems that Terah was ruler of Urkesh, but he doesn't seem to he doesn't seem to have come from, say, a royal line. It's more that he was a power broker. So we don't have any indication in say the Mari letters that he was of royal descent, but it does very much seem like he was a essentially the kingmaker, as it were. You know, somebody who was so powerful that he was like a king. And when Abraham moves to Canaan, with his inheritance, Abraham got an inheritance, from Terah. When Terah moves out to Haran, he's basically the inheritance is divided between the two remaining sons. So there's just something there that Abraham gets half of what remains, and then he goes out and then sort of makes his living in Canaan as a sojourner. But there's some very interesting things and details about Abraham's life too that are very, very interesting as well. Like, he has a large number of retainers. For basically a sojourner of that time, with 314 trained men, that's a large private army, given the depopulation of Canaan at the time. So yeah, there's some very, very, very interesting sort of dynamics going on in the life of sojourners at that period of time. Nathan Yadon asks, Terah a plutocrat? Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that probably best describes him is he's a plutocrat. So absolutely, I think that's a great description for Terah. And we're actually really, really lucky to have letters from Terah. So we are exceptionally fortunate. We don't have these for most other characters mentioned in the Bible. So I think that's an excellent way to put it, and I think we got some great evidence for him. Okay, and then I saw here another question. Jungle Jargon. Was Terah Nimrod's idol maker? No. And not as far as we can tell. It does seem to be that Nimrod well predates Terah. So I don't think that even basically given all the conservative views on Nimrod, none of them seem to sort of match with the time frame of Terah. So Terah dates to the 18th century BC, and Nimrod would have been long before. So I don't think Terah was idol maker. We don't know who Nimrod's idol maker was, but we know it's not Terah. So anyway, thank you for that question, Jungle Jargon. Can't say I've ever heard of that before, but no. Okay, I'm going to take another one from the Camel Leopard. Let's see here. What time we got? Let's go another 15 minutes if we have questions. I'm currently pursuing a bachelor's degree in biblical studies, and my Old Testament professor is teaching the 15th century BC date of the Exodus. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh, yeah, you are going to find Old Testament professors that still hold this view. A lot of them have to be because it's a very conservative view. One of the things I will say about ABR is they've done a really excellent job of convincing seminaries, churches, denominations that the early Exodus view is the Orthodox view. And this has just done a number on quality biblical scholarship. It really has. Should you correct it or just let it be? Just let it be. Honestly, just let it be. Unless you want a lot of trouble coming to your life, just let it be. If he wants you to write on the Exodus, tell him the 15th century BC date. Otherwise, you will have a whole heap of trouble that you don't need. You've got lots of time afterwards to talk about this if you want to talk about this. I know I've paid a dear price for taking this stand, a very very dear price. Um, it's not a popular opinion. It's the correct opinion. The evidence all backs it up, you know, but the evidence isn't going to matter when perceptions and institutional donors really, really hate it. And that's really what's going on here. Is a lot of schools are supported by institutional donors that really, really believe in a 15th century BC date of the Exodus because that's what they're getting in their churches. And professors are paid according to the institutional donors. It's about money. It's about money. Which is why you don't find many people who hold a late Exodus date in Christian schools. It's a terrible thing, absolutely terrible thing. Wish it was otherwise. But I walked into a job interview once for a at a Christian university, which will remain nameless to protect the guilty. First question, the interview was scheduled for 2 hours. Scheduled for 2 hours. First question they asked was, what was your opinion on the date of the Exodus? And, I tried to dodge the question, but I couldn't, and I had to answer it. And then it was, well, thank you very much for applying. We won't be needing to go any further. That interview was over in less than 20 minutes. And it was 10. 10 minutes, it was done. That was it. You don't need that kind of trouble. Not as a student. You don't need that trouble as a student. So I would definitely recommend you say, repeat whatever the teacher wants you to repeat. He says 15th century, repeat that on the exam. You can always hold the real opinion in your heart. Okay. So anyway, thank you for the question. I hope you do well in your studies. And just remember, this is not the end of your learning. This is just the beginning. All right, let's see. Any other questions here? Okay. I'm going to take this question from Gizgo SBOL. How do we know the Merneptah Stela wasn't referring to Israel suffering famine or defeat by the Canaanites? Okay. Because this occurs in the Merneptah Stela's poetic section. Now, in the poetic sections, what we find is often basically past deeds that the king had done. Okay. So when he goes through, say, the eight toponyms in the poetic section, each toponym applies to something he does. He defeats the Libyans. He has peace with the Hittites. And then he talks about going through the cities of Ashkelon, Canaan, which is probably Gaza, Gezer, Yenoam, and Israel. Now, we actually have a from the excavation at Gezer, they found a scarab of Merneptah. So there's really, really good evidence to say that Merneptah was at Gezer at some point. So knowing that he made it to Gezer, it isn't inconceivable that he just went a little farther and engaged the Israelites too. So I don't think this is talking about famine. I don't think there's any good reason to think this is talking about famine. But I think there's every good reason to think that this was reflecting an earlier campaign of Merneptah, where he goes, and these are more. This was a small sort of policing campaign, where he basically goes up the coastal plain, through the Jezreel Valley, and back down into the Judean foothills. So that seems to be what's happening in the poetic section of the Stela. So that's probably the best we know. And frankly, too, we also know that that these are tribes he encountered along the way, and the only way he would know that what tribes are there is by him going through it. So it does seem to reflect local geography as well as, say, the situation of the tribal groups themselves. Like, for example, Merneptah Stela designates the Hurrians as a tribal group as well as the Israelites, which is consistent. It's not just a place name. So that's what we find there. So, I mean, that's how we can be pretty confident that this was actually a early campaign that happened in probably the first 4 years of his reign. And Merneptah too was actually very, very healthy in his elderly age. So, you know, it wouldn't be any surprise at all if he went on campaign even at his age. So we do have very good reports of his health when in his 60s. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Interesting question. Okay. Got another super chat here from Sean Harding. Good to see you tonight, friend. I'm glad you could make it. If the primordial singular divine entity was largely inactive, which lead suggested by Jan Osman, to the belief in active gods who control the destinies of the world, what was the reason for coming up with the inert deity? Basically the origin of the gods. Okay. Now, the primordial singular divine entity is what's called the primordial waters, the Peshtat, the ancient god, ancient divinities. It is the idea that God does not come out of nothing. There has to be some sort of divine essence from which God comes. So it's a matter of inner essence, divine essence, giving birth to active essence, divine essence. Okay? So that's sort of what's going on here when we see sort of the things like the divine waters. You know, what in Egyptian myth, like you have the waters, and in the beginning there's nothing but the waters. So what's happening in Egyptian myth is you have the waters that give birth to the egg of Re. The egg hatches, and then you have the sun god Re, our Atum Re. And Atum Re is then a creator deity, and then he then creates the other gods, and then those gods create their particular items. You know, like the river, the land, and all that. The Ogdoad, the 5 great gods. You know, Atum Re creates the Nut and the Geb, the sky and the earth, and they come together and they make more gods. Horus the Elder, Osiris, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys, and then they create other gods who then populate the world. So it answers ultimately the question, where do the gods come from? By not answering it in a way. So what they're doing is basically saying, okay, we have to go from essence to essence. So they start off with a divine essence, an inert divine essence, and then move more to the active divine essence. So that's the reason they're trying to grapple with that explanation of where did the gods come from. Now, not every Egyptian cult is going to take this view, like the Memphite theology. They're going to take a different view on this. They're going to take the idea that the god Ptah, their creator god, the god Ptah, who is a big mummy, is self-created. He created himself. There was no divine essence. He just creates himself into being. So that's how the Memphites are going to deal with that problem. but it is a different approach to the same problem. The problem is, where do the gods come from? They don't yet have an idea that God could be someone that always was. That's outside of time. They don't have the idea of time as a created construct in and of itself. So, they're going to have to engage this problem in a variety of creative ways in order to answer that question of where did the gods. So anyway, thank you very much for that generous super chat. I hope that answers your question. And it's really, really good to see you tonight. I'm glad you could make it. Okay, we will try to squeeze in one last question. One last non-super chat, and then we'll probably call it a night, unless there's another. When did what? Coins? Coins came into Egypt during the Greek period. The Ptolemies. RG Strategy has a question. Okay. Okay. Yes. RG Strategy was not until the Ptolemies, and actually the earliest coin we have from Egypt is Ptolemy II's. So that's when we start seeing coins in Egypt. But until then, it was all barter. Egypt was entirely a barter economy, and it was a barter economy that was pegged to a unit of currency called the bronze deben. And the bronze deben is a weight of bronze. And it wasn't an actual currency that was ever in circulation. Now, they did make some debens. Now, the Egyptians did make some debens, but people didn't carry around bronze debens to use as currency. They just traded goods based upon the value of the deben. So that's sort of how currency works in ancient Egypt. Now, they had other debens too. They had gold debens as well, which are much, much more valuable. But you don't see those very often. They also had other forms of currency too, called the seniu and the car. A car is a sack of grain. A seniu is, I believe, an eighth of a deben. So a car was actually 4 seniu or half a deben. So that's how sort of the economy of ancient Egypt worked. Okay, and I'm going to take one last. I'm going to take that prisoner, because I already took one from him. So, what is the Egyptian word for money? And I just gave it to you, deben. Okay. Do I take that one, though? Yeah, sure, why not? Do you agree with, this will be the last non-super chat of the night. So if there's no more super chats, we are going to call it a night. So this last question is from Chow Yi. Do you agree with Heiser that Genesis 1 does not purport ex nihilo? And ex nihilo means out of nothing creation. And I would agree. I actually here would agree with him. I think the evidence is strong that that Genesis 1 is not actually the sort of beginning of creation. So I do actually agree with Heiser here, and I don't think Genesis 1 tries to show ex nihilo creation. Now, it does show fiat creation. We do have to understand that there's a difference here between ex nihilo and fiat creation. Now, fiat creation is when a god says by divine decree, let there be something, and there was something. Okay? So there's a one-to-one correspondence between the will and the speaking of the god and its creation. So I think Genesis 1 definitely points to fiat creation, but not necessarily ex nihilo. In fact, in some cases, we know it's not ex nihilo, like the creation of man. Man is created from the soil. So that's not ex nihilo creation. That's creation from a pre-existing substrate. So I generally agree with Heiser here that this is not a representation of ex nihilo. Now, I also think too that like Genesis 1:1 is, there's a debate over Genesis 1:1, which is this a title or, and I'll pop that back up, the Bible back up again, because that's a toy. Go to Genesis 1 here. You know, the very first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the big debate over this one verse is it a title or is it a first act of creation? There's going to be some problems with, say, the fourth day of creation, where, you know, if you take this as say a creative act, well, God creates the heavens, but he also then later on creates the sun, the stars, etc. So there's going to be a problem here, and a problem reconciling this with, say, verse 4, or sort of the fourth day of creation, I think. Here. Yeah. Genesis 1:16. Or God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser to govern the night. He also made the stars. Well, if he's making the stars there, then what are the heavens? So I think there's some problems with taking this as a creative act. Now, on the other hand, if you take this as, say, the title of the passage, you know, you reconcile that, but then you open it up to something else, which is that the earth in verse 2, and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. Now, that "and" at the beginning there is a consecutive vav, which means that, you know, it sort of picks up where the last sentence leaves off. It's not a change in subject as such. So if that first verse is a title, that's going to lead you to the idea that the earth was already there when the Spirit of God hovered over it. So there does seem to be a resumptive act of creation, which means that that what we're dealing with here is actually two creations. There's a presumptive creation and a resumptive one. And the resumptive one is what's being described here in Genesis 1. It's no less an act of creation. Just like, you know, when, you know, God says, I will wrap up, I'll create a new heavens and a new earth. Well, is that the same earth or is that a new earth? It's going to depend. Here we got a earth here that's being sort of remodeled, as it were, being changed, but it was one that sort of is selected. It's divinely selected for this particular treatment. So it seemed to be the sort of the perfect place, and where we have here, say, waters, the primordial waters, very, very similar to what we see in, say, Egyptian myth, where there's an idea of, say, primordial waters, but God is separating the waters to do creation. God doesn't come out of the waters. He's not a part of the water. His essence isn't from the waters, but he's there over the waters. And basically the text in verse 2 says, you know, and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. So even here, he's above creation. He's above it, and he does his creative acts to make the spaces needed for the temple of the earth. So, you know, this is where I stand on these first couple verses of Genesis. And I would agree with Michael Heiser that there is not an implication of ex nihilo creation, but there is the implication of fiat creation. And we see this in verse 3. When then God said, let there be light, and there. So anyway, I hope that helped. I hope that helped explain the passage and answer your question. Thank you very much for the question. Great question. And with that, I think we are going to call it a night. So anyway, I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight for a very, very lively discussion with some great questions. And I want to take this opportunity to thank our Patreon supporters. And if you haven't been a Patreon supporter, please consider becoming one. We don't give you great rewards on our Patreon, but it really helps us, and it does pay much of our ministry expenses to bring these videos and this content to you. I want to also thank our super chatters who really, really help us get by. We couldn't do it without you. We thank and appreciate every super chatter that helps the channel out. It's really, really, I mean, we are really, really blessed and really, really grateful, and we praise God that you guys just, come and help us. You become co-laborers with us and with Christ in. And so with that said, I want to thank all our supporters and subscribers, and I want to wish everyone a good night. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and Bible.